Welcome to Mastering Your World Through Frequencies. In this episode, there's an introduction, an interview, and most importantly, at the end, a group frequency calibration where the frequency work happens and change is catalyzed. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. This is Karen Cheong, and I'm here with my co-host, Tia. Some of us spend a lot of time trying to figure out who we really are, but somehow can't seem to find ourselves. And others of us feel like we have a very strong sense of who we are. Wherever you fall in this spectrum, how much of your sense of self is defined by something external to you, like your relationships, what you do for a living, where you live, and how much money you do or don't have, or any of a million other things that are outside of you? There are many people who, if those things are taken away, face an identity crisis. Today, we're discussing the critical difference between a weak sense of self anchored in the ego mind, and the sense of what I call the big S self that is anchored in spirit. What does that look like? What can happen as a result? And how do you shift from one to the other so you can establish an unshakable knowing of who you truly are? And after the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration at the end is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. So let's jump right in.
So Karen, how would you define the difference between a strong sense of self and a fuzzy sense of self?
Yeah. So the way I'm talking about it is that the fuzzy sense of self is where you don't have a strong sense of who you are unless you're referencing someone else. So meaning like in relation to someone else, or a situation or circumstance or your job or money. Like you don't, it's very amorphous sense of self. And a strong sense of self, the way I'm speaking about it is, I don't mean just from like an ego standpoint, okay? It's like clarity from a higher order where you are aware of who you are from a larger sense of self, what I call the big S self, identified with spirit, and more aware of your brilliance. So you have that internal strong sense of like, you know who you are. You know? And so therefore you won't be controlled as easily, you won't be oppressed, you know, because you're just like, I know the brilliance that I am and I'm not going to tolerate that. You see?
So it's like someone who's so strong that it doesn't matter what's going on outside of them.
Exactly. Yeah. And they have nothing to prove.
Yep.
They don't need to be better than anyone else. They're more neutral. So it's like, okay, well, if that doesn't go as they hoped, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to be neutral to that. I don't have to be with it, meaning like I can choose to leave, but they're not fighting in resistance, right? Because they understand or feel the sense of who they are on a bigger scale. Now, that sounds very grand, right? And it's not like we necessarily have to have that all the time, right? But more of that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Whereas somebody with a fuzzy sense of self doesn't have that. And so they don't know who they are. And so they're seeking a lot, like, who am I? And a lot of people will, as a result, they will, with somebody like that, they'll like kind of like, they need the momentum of other people. Like they can get excited and rally behind someone else.
Okay. Would you say that's like a leader and a follower?
Can be.
It can be, doesn't have to be.
And it's not even that they're weak. Because it's not about weakness. It's just that on their own, they can't generate that kind of excitement because they don't have a sense of who they are. So they need someone else's excitement to propel them.
I wonder about fuzzy sense of self people. Are they more easily swayed?
Can. Yes.
Okay.
By someone else's enthusiasm, excitement, opinion,
whatever
that type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's easy, and you and I have talked about this before, where for them to lose themselves in like relationship.
Yes.
Okay? Whether it's an intimate partner or friendships or whatever, because they don't have a strong sense of self. And so they need the other person to sort of give them like who they are. And a lot of people who have a fuzzy sense of self actually often will have a lot of friends. It's funny, they'll either have a lot of friends so they can kind of bounce off of them and know who they are, or they're kind of alone because they don't, they can't, it's hard for them to like get their bearings. Like they don't really, do you know what I mean? Because when they're in interaction with other people, sometimes because they have such a soft or amorphous sense of self, other people push into them. You know, they'll push their frequencies into them, they'll try to bully them, that type of thing, or like get them to go their way because it's easy to, right? They don't have a strong sense of self. So it's like, okay, I'll follow along. But it's not because they're weak, but it's just because they don't, you know what I mean? They don't know where the boundary of them is and another. So it's like sometimes they'll self-isolate because
that's a not great feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they don't really like that sense of like people trying to push them, and they're hypersensitive to control in that way because do you see what I'm saying? They're always being pushed into and they don't like it.
I've actually seen people, and I know people who fuzzy sense of self, have a lot of friends, do the bouncing off thing, and then feel like it's almost like they get these crash moments where they have to be alone because they're completely exhausted. Yeah. And then don't even know what's going on, you know, and do like the little isolation thing. Yes. And then go back out and then. Yeah.
So what they're doing in that thank you for that, because what they're doing is kind of a version of what the person does by themselves, right? But what they're doing is they're in interaction with other people so they can feel something about themselves, right? Because they're in relation, like they're defining in relation to other people. But then those people push into them, which doesn't feel good, just like the other person who self-isolates, right? And it feels like exhausting after a while because all these people are pushing into them. They're like, oh God, it's too much, right? And then they self-isolate for a little while, but then they kind of freak out because they're like, well, who am I? It's like depressing, right? And they're like, and they feel this aloneness. Because the emptiness that they're feeling is because they need the other to feel them. Does that make sense? So they feel alone, really alone, because they don't have like this ease or this comfort or this knowingness of their own brilliance.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So as a result, they need the other to make themselves feel
that
full.
They feel something.
Yeah, they feel something, full themselves, something.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the trouble with the fuzzy sense of self. Right? It's always externally defined.
Okay. I'm thinking about like what's going on in the world right now with the vaccine topic. And of course, this isn't for or against anything. Just when you have someone that doesn't know who they are, they might be more easily swayed. To do something like that, which is fine, and then feel like more less confused maybe because they chose something or you know.
So meaning that when they choose something, which whatever way it is, either to have or that to not have because it's right or something, then that dissolves that confusion because it gives them a direction, right? Yes. It gives them a direction and they feel like, okay, I've gone a certain way and that now defines them, right? That choice gives them something to anchor their identity around.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that will happen a lot where a lot of people with a fuzzy sense of self will also lose themselves in like movements, right? Or like different groups, okay, whatever they are, right? Because that group now defines them, right? And then they're like, oh, I have a place. Like I know who I am because it's defined by all these things externally, whether it's rules or what other people expect of me or whatever it is, but that's how they define self. So it can be really hard for people like this because they're seeking for themselves, but they don't know where to look. And it's hard because they don't really, you know what I mean? Like there's
it's almost like a hole inside.
Exactly.
So it's kind of this never-ending cycle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are people, would you say someone would be like born this way? And then of course it can shift, but like I'm just thinking about myself personally, and we've talked about this, like I feel like I've always known who I was.
I know. It's amazing.
Even if that thing changed, I was like, this is it since I was little. And I would pave the way and people would copy me and then I would change it and then everyone would copy me. You know, so
you're the opposite of what we're talking about.
So is it like you're kind of born with a certain sense, or what do you think? It can shift, of course.
It can shift. It can shift. So it depends on who you are. Some people come in and they are, for some people, they really don't like their bodies. Okay, it's harder for them to anchor into the body and be centered in their body. Okay. And so as a result, they don't really have a strong sense of where their boundaries are. That can distort further if they're taught you have to be kind or nice. Because if you're really nice, right, that means you allow all these people in and that you have to be accommodating to everyone else. So it's about their need, not yours. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this happens not just with women, by the way, it also happens a lot with men, especially men who are, raised by moms who really didn't want their boys to be jerks, right? Because their fathers were, or their partners were, or whatever. So they're trying to raise a boy who's kind. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Okay. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with like having children who are kind.
Yeah.
However, we've talked about it where this is the spectrum of nice, right?
Oh, yeah.
And how like there's a difference between kind and niceness, and that really, if there's any kind of self-sacrifice, then that's not really helping you or anyone else. Yeah. Exactly. So that's what happens also. That sort of niceness thing can distort and set in, and then that's what happens, right? So now you have a child who is already uncomfortable with being in the body, not centered in the body for a number of different reasons. And then you have the distortion of you're supposed to be kind, feeling other people, right? And then you kind of lose like where you are in all of this.
I have a good example, and I have a question behind the example. So, when I was little, I have a brother who's 2 years older.
Okay.
And he's more that kind, malleable type, and I was a very strong sense of self type. So it's interesting. So I'm remembering just little moments of like, he might be like, hey, can I sit in the front seat today? And I'm like, no, I'm in the front seat. And it's like, okay. And he would just go, okay. It would just be a lot of that. I was, pushy. I was also a nice sister, but I'm just saying those moments. Yeah. Can the strong sense of self person often push into?
That's what I'm saying.
That's
exactly.
What you're saying. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And so what will happen is that it's almost like the people, and it's going to sound terrible, and it's true, but it's like the people who have that fuzzy sense of self, because they don't have a defined boundary, of their spirit body. Yeah. It's almost like they're asking, it's like the broadcast is, I am available to be pushed into because my boundary is weak. Does that make sense? So therefore, so please know this is not like a blame thing, right? It's just the way you're constructed. It's kind of just like mechanics in a way, right? So what that does is it calls for someone to be like, okay, well, I'm going to push into you because you're like, I have weak boundaries. I'm used to having people push into me. So, I'm allowing that. On some level.
Unconsciously.
Unconsciously. Yeah. That's the distortion pattern. That's my point. Yeah. Right? It's a distortion. I'm not saying you're desiring it. I'm not saying they desire it. It's just like, it's almost like two ends of a magnet coming together. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So it's just what's going to, so even if it's like, if it weren't you, for example, that was like, it was going to be someone else.
He attracted girlfriends that were the same.
Just exactly the same. Yeah. Or some of his friends, I'm sure, were like very dominant or whatever. Yeah. But that happens a lot when you have a fuzzy sense of self like that. And you can also be in situations where there's a lot more abuse that can happen as a result, right? Because you can't tell, like I said, it's all about telling where the boundary of your spirit body is, right? So you can't tell. It's like someone like pushes into you. Like we all have a sense of personal space. I think we all know that, right? Like, so you can tell, like if someone gets about this close to you, start to feel uncomfortable.
You can feel if someone's behind you.
Yeah. And so you're just like, no, that's too close. No, I don't know you. You need to like step back.
And everyone's is a little different.
Yeah. And some people it's closer, some people it's further away. Okay. So for the fuzzy sense of self, very permeable, right? So that means that like someone will push in and then it gets to about like too close, right? And then all of a sudden there's anger, right? Because you're just like, it's like a violation then because it's so far in to the spirit body, close to the rendering that sometimes as like a last ditch effort to defend, it's like get out. But then it's like a lot of anger. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because for that person, it's like a violation at that point, but they haven't been aware of it. It's like, fine. Oh my God, now we're in like code red. And now we're in anger. And some people don't even get angry. They allow the person to come right into them. And that's when you have people who really become like almost like run patterns of like subjugation. Where they feel like they have to submit to be worthy or to be seen or to be loved or whatever, like overtaken almost by another.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, it's really can be really horrible. And what's really wonderful is that when you see people who do frequency work, this is the exciting thing. People who have like a fuzzy sense of self start to strengthen, and they're like, wait a minute.
No. Back out of it. Yeah.
Cool. But it's true. And it might not. Yeah. And at first it's kind of funny. It's kind of endearing actually. Because some people, they haven't said no their whole lives, right? And it's kind of like scary and like it's hard for them. And so sometimes the first few times they do it, it's a little over hard, you know, because they're not really used to it. So they're like, back off, right? And the person's like, whoa, a little.
And it's like all the years of
exactly. And then they can realize that, oh, I can hold my space with authority because my spirit body is strong and I've released a lot of these distortion patterns. I'm clarifying. I don't have to be so hard to push out.
Yeah.
I can hold my, you know what I mean? I trust my own authority in my space. I understand my own brilliance. I understand that this is a boundary and they cannot come in. And so you can modulate it over time. And I think the wonderful thing is as we start to define sense of self, like what's really wonderful is to see how it shows up in the masculine and the feminine because it's different. So in the masculine, when guys who associate more with their masculine, because you know some men associate more with the feminine, and that's fine. But for the men who associate more with the masculine as who have an amorphous sense of self, they're kind of like they really start to feel more solid, more grounded, and all of a sudden more females will be interested in them.
Yes.
They're just like, hello.
Because they're in their masculine.
They're in their
so
masculine,
they're attracting the feminine.
Exactly. And they're occupying their space and they have a stronger sense of self. So the feminine's like, wow, there's something really solid there that I find so attractive, you know what I mean? And for the feminine, what will happen is because this is if you're doing this through frequency work and you're starting to feel your own brilliance, it's soft, right? So meaning we all have different ratios of masculine to feminine, right? And what I would say is it's in your own flavor. So it's like you start to define yourself and you start to have more authority. So you become more in your power, but it's not like you have to like control anyone or abuse anyone or be like to like push into them to be like, I am the queen bee. You know, it's not about that. It's more like, and no, you can't come in here. It's like soft, but really firm.
I think we've talked about this before where it's like the mountain.
Yes.
It doesn't have to prove anything, but it's just like, whoa.
There.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know.
It's just this presence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when women who do this work in their feminine, it's really beautiful to watch because it's almost like, I don't know if we don't have that many role models of this, but it's like this grace that comes in, right? Because it's a softness. It's like a knowingness of our own power. Without having to, like I said, like assert it on anyone. And it's confidence, but it's not over someone. It's just in yourself. So it's a certain amount of grace, you know? It's like a woman who just knows who she is, right? All of her faults, all of her glory, all of her strengths, all of her everything, and is okay with that. And it's really beautiful to watch, you know? Because it's so rare. And it's also content and happy, which also rare. Shockingly, you know, in our culture. So,
oh, what a great image.
Yeah. So
Thanks
it's really
for describing that.
So it's really awesome. So again, and especially for women, it's like we're taught that we have to be nice, right? So it just distorts further this fuzzy sense of self. So for some women, they have to really release a lot of distortion around like what they're supposed to do, you know, to be nice, to be kind, to be the one who provides everything in the family and the people that they love and all that stuff. Yes, the masculine has it too, but the feminine has a lot of this. So as we clear that up, not only individually, but as a collective, the distortion around the feminine changes and we get to be something that's more empowered. And like I said, the sense of self isn't about the ego mind self. You know, it's not like defined by like other rule sets of like what achievement or success is or all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's more about recognizing truly who you are, right? This is, and it's so funny. We've had a number of people say to me, like, when I started this journey, I didn't know who I was looking for. But I realized I was looking for me. You know, it's so beautiful. I love that. It's so poignant. And it's just like, and now I know who I truly am. And when it moves me even now when I think of it, because it's just like, hallelujah, you know?
And it's been there the whole time.
I know. We didn't know. Because we have all these distortions in us. Right? So as we clear this out and that sense of self from a higher order comes in, right? And the GFC at the end is like the thing that begins all that. Then all this beautiful stuff about like, oh my God, I'm really amazing, you know, and not in a glorified, over ego-y kind of way.
And again, like you said, not in comparison to anyone else. It's just you. Just recognizing your value.
Exactly. Your value, your brilliance, and the magnificence that we are, because we are. And, you know,
and defining yourself by that.
Yes. Nice. And it's really spectacular. Okay.
So I just have one side question here. Could someone have a strong sense of self in some areas and then not in others? Yeah.
So what I would say is that it's not, okay, it depends how much distortion you have, because your distortion isn't even. Does that make sense? So as you firm up your sense of self, that's happening in the background when you do frequency work. But there are some of us that have more distortion in certain areas. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So more low self-worth, for example.
Yes.
Or more, but in like knowing what it is that how you want to serve might be very clear.
Yes.
Right?
Knowing what you want to do, knowing what you like.
Yeah.
100%
super
clear.
Yeah. But other
then,
things challenged.
Okay.
That's just because you have distortion there. So what's happening is, as a whole, so multiple things are happening at the same time when we do frequency work. And I talk about them linearly because that's how our minds process. But what's happening is the more frequency work you do, the more your spirit body gets strong, the more you start to feel internally complete and like you have more of a sense of self from a different place, like more confidence. You can't define it, but you just feel better in yourself, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you have these distortions that are clearing, obviously, around you, but you still have some where there's like more trigger point, right? So it might be like around scarcity or relationship or whatever. And that's where you'll find more challenge. Yeah. Because you're still clearing those distortions.
Though your sense of self might be
getting stronger
in other areas.
And it's that it feels clearer to you in other areas because you don't have as much distortion.
Oh,
but it's strong everywhere. It's strengthening everywhere. It's just that your ability to perceive it changes depending on how much distortion you have in that area.
Got it. Yes, that is very clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're about to start the group frequency calibration, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. Because I'm working on frequency level, GFCs are not like regular meditations. Many people go into a somewhat altered state, so please don't drive while listening to this. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.